an appreciation and description of American philanthropy, its role in the economy, its role in innovation. I'm hearing a plea to not overregulate it.
Right.
And I'm hearing a kind of a call to action and challenge to philanthropy to mobilize around a creative approach to address the needs of the bottom 15%.
Right.
That's the argument. That's the sort of three parts of the
Right,
book.
because that's where we're getting a big expense drain, and if we could fix it, you know, imagine that people 30 or 40 years from now would say, you know, the people who got focused on the power of philanthropy figured out how to solve that problem, and the whole national budget changed. And suddenly, we were in a different place.
I want to go back to that first part for a minute,
Absolutely.
if I could. It seems to me that the main argument against your idea would be could be called a social justice argument. And it would go something like this. It would say that if we are helping each other as a society through freely giving of our resources and time to one another, citizen to citizen giving, that places all of the power and the discretion in the hands of the donor. That person is deciding who to give to, under what conditions, and so forth.
Right.
What other societies do, and what has been argued that we should do, is citizen to government to citizen. You tax the donor, the money goes to the government, and therefore a broader policy, it's more democratic. The people receiving the benefits then are not receiving charity, they're receiving an entitlement, or they are receiving something that they are due by right. So there's a social justice argument that says charity is not as good as justice. Giving is not as good as being entitled, and free giving is not as good as political decision making that's democratic. What do you say to that?
Well, let's look at the pieces of it. You know, I'm a practicing Roman Catholic, so I can't be against social justice, and I certainly am not against charity. And so let me say that up front so I can get accepted back into the church this Sunday. However, what we have seen is the importance of investment in fellow citizens by fellow citizens. And the fact that 89% of Americans give on an annual basis means that it's not just some little group of 150 wealthy people who are making this justice happen. It's really everybody. And what we'd like to see is more of everybody more deeply engaged in this giving. Now, it's true that in the last, let's say, 20, 25 years, so it's not a political issue, America has fallen a bit off its position of the top of the heap in graduates from high school and literacy levels by age 9 and a whole set of statistics. Infant mortality, we're 26th out of 30 developed countries. That's not great. So that's why, in a sense, the people who are on the side you're talking about, which you're calling the social justice side, are gaining momentarily on the side of the freedom lovers. But that's why this thinking now is so important, because we have time to flip this around, to alert people to the importance of fellow citizens receiving an investment from fellow citizens in a community. Their sense of engagement with each other, the sense of expectation that I have when I've seen that you and your family and other people want me to do better, and you're willing to see to it that I can. And perhaps not only by checks, but by staying involved with helping me, as was done in our early history. This is where we came from. The very first societies that did philanthropy understood the difference between getting a government check or having the government deal with it, which in 1820 was called an almshouse or a poorhouse. And you would not want me to spend time telling you how awful those circumstances are. If you want to know, we can talk about it at Q&A. But instead, what societies did, mostly societies of women, was they said, we're going to set up a house of industry. And these widows with their children will each have a small set of rooms in the house, and they'll be on the main floor. There'll be a room with looms and weaving and sewing materials, and we'll bring, we who are still women in our family situation, will bring the cloth and the material you need, and we'll come and babysit so that you don't have to worry, you who are widows, about the children, and you'll be able to earn money in an appropriate and protected setting, and then we'll go out and sell what you make and bring the money back.
These were the women's societies.
These were the women's
Alternatives
societies.
to the
almshouse.
the public almshouses.
Right.
Yeah.
And so people in our culture, right after the ink was signed to the Declaration, they began to operate as citizens on behalf of fellow citizens. We never were a monarchy. We never considered the government the place to go or the place we had to go. So the people who would be coming to the kind of conclusions you're coming to are people who haven't thought through the difference between being a subject and being a citizen. If you have forever been a part of a monarchy, you are a subject. In some monarchistic settings, you were also called a serf. And in those settings, each of you was individually frightened by the leader, whoever that person was, because as is happening in some places still in this world, the leader person can send in the police and do anything he wants in your household.
The relationships
and your neighbors,
the relationships
that's right,
go this
they're
way
all hard,
as
they're all
opposed
vertical,
to
and
this way.
exactly.
So you have more diversity
Right.
and so forth.
And so people don't feel connected to each other, because if I say anything about what the police did to you last night, they'll do it to me tonight, so I'm going to stay quiet. Whereas in a democracy, the kind of government the Founding Fathers set up, what we had instead was citizens engaged with each other. As the entrepreneurial spirit began to build the Industrial Revolution, it was self-interest rightly understood. That is, the principles, that doesn't mean everybody fulfilled the principles properly, but it means that the principles of self-interest rightly understood mean that I have a relationship to you that involves my seeing to your well-being as the best way to assure my own well-being. Oh, well, that means that I'm a citizen and not a subject. We, the people, control the government, and we, the people, are going to watch out for each other's well-being. Now, I have to say, if we fall off the mark and we stop doing that, and we let the society fall apart with a small number of wealthy people, and well, that's wrecking what the founders set up. So in a way, this book wants to ring a bell and get everybody's attention, not just the attention of foundations and people of wealth, but everybody, and say, we have to understand our relationships to each other and to make sure that we're making investments in each other through our freely expressed contributions.
That's third sector.
And that's
all right, I'm going to take
sector.
another run at this by making here is a recent article from the Wall Street Journal by Kimberly Dennis. And she's basically saying, you know, philanthropy, what's so good about philanthropy?
I'm glad she didn't say the other word.
While businesses may do more for the public good than they're given credit for, philanthropies may do less. Think about it a moment. Can you point to a single charitable accomplishment that has been as transformative as, say, the cell phone or the birth control pill? To the contrary, the literature of philanthropy is riddled with examples of failure, including where philanthropic efforts have actually left intended beneficiaries worse off. Now, she's actually works for a philanthropy, so she says, I don't mean to belittle philanthropy, but then she goes on to say, my point is simply that there is nothing inherently better or nobler about using one's resources for charitable purposes than for any number of others. If anything, the marketplace does a better job of channeling resources toward where they are most valued.
Well, in fact, that's actually not true. Philanthropists are the first money in. When an idea is way too wacky for an investment, when a company or an investor has an expectation of return on invested funds, and you approach them and say, I think I can produce something better than a microscope, and they say, not likely. This doesn't make sense. Who's ever heard of anything like this? What do you mean antibiotic? What's biotics? Can't invest in that. And in fact, the gentleman who did penicillin, invented penicillin, tried to get money from the marketplace,
the private sector.
Private sector, and they said,
because why?
No
because
way.
The philanthropists have a higher tolerance for risk. Would that be it?
Well, the philanthropist looks at things differently. He says, as Rockefeller did when he funded that doctor who did penicillin, he said there's a 1 in 3 trillion chance that this bug would actually be something people could take as a medicine, and it would kill infections in your body. Because anything that killed the staphylococcus in the petri dish would obviously kill you if you ate it, right? So all of the industries said no way. His government said no way. But Rockefeller had the money to say there's a 1 in 3 trillion chance. But look at the 1. If it hit, it would be the end of infectious disease on the planet. It would be a total change in the lifespan of human beings. And he made a few other things like that you can figure out. And he said, I'm going to go for it. Do you see what I mean? The 3 trillion was wildly outpaced by the possible outcome.
If only the marketplace
it would have to
allocates
safe.
Resources,
right.
You miss a certain level of
upside,
right. The risk taking that only the
right.
philanthropist is going to make.
Right, because that person is willing to say, as many do, particularly people like Carnegie and Mrs. Sage, they say, I have this money, in a sense, by God's grace or by luck or however they want to put it, and I can make this investment. Whereas when you're a financial investor, a commercial, you've got responsibilities to other investors, you've got other places that are more sure where you should put the money. It's a whole different piece. Look at how many people are funding scholarships, particularly K through 12, and you look at some little kids and you'd say, what are the chances that this little person is going to, I don't think so. Because you're looking in that tiny little space.
Right.
Instead of saying, with the proper opportunity, this person could, and that's the eye of the philanthropist. So I think she's running short on good ideas when she says that.
Yeah. Then the other thing, I got this from the book, which I thought was to me made a lot of sense, is that if the threshold for the marketplace is going to not permit the maximum innovation,
right.
Similarly with politics,
right.
Because with a political bar, you have to build a broad consensus. Right. There has to be wide buy-in from a majoritarian view. So
it takes years.
The long shot, the thing that might fail, but if it succeeds, it would be a breakthrough, is unlikely to pass that threshold.
That's right.
So you have a marketplace that is, to put it a different way, if you have this third sector, you're going to have a seedbed for innovation that would not be possible if all you had was either a political consensus or return on investment from
Absolutely.
investment.
Absolutely. And that's why America's economy is so innovative, because we have this pool of mad money. At the end of the, no, but I mean, you have to be realistic. At the end of the First World War, a young man came back and had seen some airplanes in the Luftwaffe in the First World War where he served, and he came back and he said to his father, Dad, you know, there ought to be a commercial aviation industry. And his father knew President Coolidge, and they together went to see him, and they said, you know, the government should be developing commercial aviation. Calvin Coolidge said, the idea of commercial aviation is intellectual exhibitionism. It'll never work. Now, those of you who have invested in airlines probably think he might have had a point. But nonetheless, most of us have been on a commercial airline. And that young man was absolutely right. What did the father do? The father was a philanthropist. And the father said, well, even if the government isn't going to do it, for exactly the reasons that David just said, I'll fund the first stage. They set up 6 universities with aeronautical engineering, which no one had heard of before. Thank you very much. Those 6 are still in place, and they are among the premier institutions in aerospace. They set up fairs that would permit people to experiment going up in an airplane in America's county fairs to familiarize people with it. And then they paid for human capital. They bought the intellectual assets of a person you all know, Robert Goddard, who went off and got funded to do aeronautics and aerospace engineering and rockets. He was a crazy guy. But 300 of his patents continue to be in every airplane that you and I travel on today. This was.
So when she says there's lots in the article, she says, "Oh, there's lots of failures." That's part of the point, right? I mean,
you couldn't have innovation without failure. The minute you want to be failure-free, it turns out you're pretty boring. Sorry.
Do American philanthropies underserve the poor?
Yes.
And therefore, if they do underserve the poor, why wouldn't a few, well, my understanding of the legislative initiatives, the Greenlining National Committee for Responsible Philanthropy, they want to have rules that would require either directly or indirectly that the money be spent in a certain way, or that it go to groups that are certain kinds of groups. So if it is true that American philanthropies are underserving the poor, why wouldn't it be a good idea to have new rules that require them to correct that imbalance?
Because that is a medicine that kills the pharmaceutical industry that is creating it. American philanthropy just doesn't work like that. So if they want the medicine to be coerced philanthropy, then philanthropy dies. We are not set up for philanthropy to be a second kind of taxation. We pay taxes, thank you very much. You can argue about whether we should pay more or less. That's another argument. But now we're talking about citizenship and citizen action and the call for citizens to be engaged with each other. That's a whole different cultural and financial framework. And if you suddenly decide to impose regulation on that, you've basically, if that's the pharmaceutical house that creates the medicine for the poor, you've just put it out of significant business, which is why I take the position that we need to simply look at philanthropy and look at each other, right, left, and center, and say, can we engage more people to give more money to continue respecting the diversity in American philanthropy, and look at this issue just of the third world level poverty we have? And could we say that by July 4th, 2026, America's 250th birthday, we could have fulfilled founders' intent? Wow. What if we gave ourselves 16 years? And what if we mobilized all the amazing work that's gone on across this country with evidence-based, highly successful programs that individual foundations have going on in 12 places? Aren't we thrilled? What if we had gotten penicillin going in 12 or 13 doctors' offices? And the rest of us with children with strep throats would see them die. No way. We get a solution like penicillin and we say, everybody's going to have it. Nobody's going to die of a strep throat. Crazy idea. But we're not scaling up what works. We know how to address infant mortality. We're doing a great job in certain places. What? What if we created a marketplace of ideas and we let the competition go on for poor communities to decide what they wanted to address and which kind of program they wanted to invite into their community? And what if we challenged them to put in the first 5% of the necessary funding to raise it, the way Carnegie did?
Carnegie did it that way.
The way Mr. Rosenwald did, who built 3,537
That's what I thought about when I read her
throughout-
thing, Name One Good Idea. How about all the libraries all over America?
Right.
How about all those schools in the South?
Look, saying stuff like that gets you published. I mean, that's why. Anyway, you really want to propose things that could work. We have the mechanisms from the commercial sector, like a competitive marketplace of successful ideas. People ought to be able to say, we want to bring that to our community, and we'll raise over the next however long it takes the first 5%. And other communities around them.
Within the community.
Right, within the low-income community. That's what Rosenwald did. That's what Carnegie did. It respects the dignity of people. It doesn't say, we'll come in, we know how to fix it, you lie right there, and we'll roll over you with a solution.
Carnegie said he would build the libraries, which he did, thousands of them, but the community had to show a clear plan to sustain them over time.
Right.
And he would not
The
give them the
building and the
first
books.
dime
Right.
unless
Right.
that had been worked
Right.
out.
And Rosenwald went into communities with sharecroppers about 30 years at the end of the Civil War, and he said, when he realized that 80% of the black children in the South were not being taught to read, and he said, no one will be able to engage in buying my products. He was the head of the Sears Roebuck, unless they have a job, and they can't get jobs unless they can read. This was American enterprise, inspiring American philanthropy.
It's in the face of complete and total abdication of responsibility by state governments.
And by national government,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, the war ended, and let's
Right.
not even talk about it,
Right.
the level of injustice. But here he walked in as a philanthropist and a major corporate leader, and he said, if you collect funds from each other, and whatever you want to do to raise money, I will match it and get the money we need, and I'll see to it that you get a school built.
You know, the Southern YMCAs, I know you know
And
this.
that's right.
They did the same thing. They had
And they were funded by him.
Yes.
Yes.
Right, a Jewish philanthropist building YMCAs all over the South for, it was just great.
Right. Right. But this is who we are as a people. If the current generation doesn't know this, you know, I say to my students, who's your mama? If you don't know where you come from and who's your daddy, then you don't know what you're carrying on or not carrying on. We have this great tradition. We need to own it. We need to preserve it. We don't need to cripple it. It has never worked like the European system. Theirs works for them because they came out of monarchies.
Yes.
And they also came out of huge labor unrest in those transitions.
Yeah.
We didn't do the same thing at all. We have a different culture. We have to respect our culture, and we have to energize it and make it work. And that means a lot of us are going to have to look at what we're doing and say, I have to do more. I have to do it in a different way. I have to help other people get as invested as I am. I have to want real outcomes.
I know you're someone who doesn't just write about it. You're actually working on some ideas to actually convene the people in the discussions to make this happen. The argument as I hear it is that it is a call to this philanthropic tradition to rise up and meet this need.
Right.
Within its own sphere,
Exactly. Exactly.
Calling upon the best of what it is rather than trying to turn it into something else.
That's exactly right. And David, if I can just take a moment to say that as the book has been passed around, it's been amazing to me how many people at major foundations, like Ford, have said this would be an opportunity for the philanthropic world to get itself focused on an outcome that would change its profile and help it to fulfill its future for America. We need to have, respecting all the diversity and all the donor intent, if we had a slice of what we do that we were all thinking of having input on, such as this declaration initiative that by 2026, the bottom 15% will have well-being statistics that match the statistics of the middle class. Guess what? They're going to need fewer services. They're going to be healthier. They're going to be able to work better and participate better in society. What an asset we will have built. Talk about investing in human capital. And it's something that philanthropy could lead. So even though they, Ford and others didn't speak out against, legislative incursions, when they're looking at the beginning of the book and the end of the book, they say, we'll sign on. This is where we should be going. This is how we should be focusing the nation on something we can all have some input on. And imagine the celebration, 2026, if we could say to the founders, thank you for what we have all benefited from, and we have made sure that in benefiting ourselves, we have fulfilled your aspirations for a country where all citizens are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we'll be able to remember that the last words of that declaration that those extraordinary individuals signed said, to achieve this end, to create this kind of a country, we pledge each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. They weren't just saying, gosh, folks, we hope this works, or let's all do our own thing. They wrote it up and they said, we're here together, this kind of a country. And who's responsible for what happens? We are. And we need the freedom they fought and died for in order to make that kind of a community exist. And maybe in this last 15 years of the 250, we could just crisp up our efforts and finish this work together. Right, left, and center.
Well, you've just done a great job in bringing together across the political spectrum around this.
Thank you, David.